I have them both.
Great. Okay, so to get us started, just to talk a little bit about the goals for this training, I'll just read them and then I'll have a few comments about each. I think they're rather straightforward, but we just want to be clear about what our goals are here. We want to familiarize you all with the 8-week curriculum that Dr. Wink developed. And this is the first of our small groups curricula, but we do expect these small groups to continue in different forms in the future. Not these exact groups, but another set of small groups. Some with hopefully new facilitators. So hopefully some of the people that are in y'all's groups will join us in the future. We're also going to think carefully today about what we mean by fostering vulnerability. That's a phrase you'll hear us say a few times today. And we'll talk through some of the problems and pitfalls that can arise when we try to do that kind of a thing. We're also going to discuss strategies for cultivating an environment in which participants feel comfortable engaging in honest conversations about their spiritual lives and experiences. And those two goals are obviously very closely related. They're not just our goals as facilitators, but they're part of this, I don't want to say shift, but they're part of the culture we're trying to build into our congregation little by little, more and more, so that we can start to have these kinds of conversations in broader groups and in different types of community than just those who come to a group like this expecting to have these kinds of conversations. So we're having conversations about creating conversations so that we can have more conversations. And sometimes that's just what church is about, but we're building together. And now, unless there's any questions about those goals, like I said, I don't think they're complicated. I just want those to be what we're aiming at. Unless there's any questions about those, I'll hand it over to Amy to introduce us to this curriculum that she's built.
Any questions? Okay. All right, so this is really straightforward, and I'm looking here at all of you, and I think all of you know how to carry on a really beautiful conversation. So I am like really happy with everyone here, and I think I've talked to every single one of you and had a really wonderful conversation. So I don't think that I need to tell you how to have a conversation. I designed the primary structure of our small group curriculum so that each week would focus on a particular thematic idea, and working through that thematic idea, focus a little bit on scripture, then move to a passage that is a representation of that or an illustration of that in a broader environment, so that we have a very specific scriptural presentation and a conversation about that. And then we look at how it works in the world and where we might see that same thing in the world, partly because we have a lot of people coming who, and we actually can talk ourselves about these very abstract ideas, but we want to think more concretely about what they actually mean. And sometimes this is difficult for people. They think they have it and they're like, know what we're supposed to say, but they don't really understand what it really means in the real world. Like, how do you see that thing? How do you understand that thing? So you'll see that the structure of each particular session is similar. So there'll be an opening where you start with an opening prayer, and Brad and I have talked about whether we should provide you with a prayer or let you be organic with it. And that's really going to be a decision that each facilitator makes. We intend to provide you with something, but I also encourage that organic moment, because what you're showing people is that they can do it, right? That anything that in that moment is worthy of prayer, and the things that come up at that particular moment, there are the burgers, is perfectly acceptable as a way to talk with God. I've started each particular session with of one moment of grace and one moment of a challenge. And if you want to use those particular moments as part of your prayer, that's the perfect opportunity to do that. This came out of some work that I was doing with children's ministries this past year, in which we really sort of talked to the children about, like, what was a good thing that happened in the week and what wasn't such a great thing that happened in the week. And they really, really blossomed in that discussion. And, for grownups, we can still have that conversation, and it actually just deepens a little bit more of the things that we are talking about. Following the opening prayer, there's a scripture passage, just an illustration. And I've added the question, and I hope that everybody sort of has a chance to talk during this particular time, to ask people what engages them with the particular passage. There's no correct answer. Some people will give the answer that they learned in Sunday school. Some people will give an entirely different answer. This is generally Lectio Divina without the very scary title. And I think that you will find that people have really a variety of things including the background noise that happens like during Zoom meetings. So, you know, for example, for your attention might be totally distracted because of Zoom. I think, you know, we will have most people who are very comfortable talking about that, and then we'll have people who are not particularly comfortable, and that's always acceptable. Both those things are perfectly reasonable for this kind of group. I don't have specific questions to develop that inquiry because I want you guys to be able to lead that in a direction and go in the direction that the group goes in. Following that, there will be a passage. Some of them are very brief and some of them are a little bit longer that are an illustration of that particular idea. And that's when I actually have several questions that are your guiding questions, so that you move from that particular passage and that particular engagement with that passage into your conversation with each other. Now, I have like given somewhat leading, well, okay, I'm not going to say leading. I'm going to say here's a path to this conversation. But again, if your conversation goes in a different direction, go with that conversation. Because what you're trying to do is encourage people to talk freely about how they respond to these particular ideas. And it may be that you get to one question. It may be that you get to all the questions. It may be you get to none of the questions. And that is perfectly fine. What I've tried to do with these questions is do a little bit of, here is a direction that you could go that would continue to deepen the conversation. But I have watched Lucius Bunton do this. And so I know that like he's able to do it. And I have had conversations with Davis King and Kristen Robertson about this. And I have watched John Hathaway do this, and both Burgers and John McMullen. And so I don't really think that I need to tell you how to read the questions to people. Did I leave you out, Pete? I've also heard you do this conversation. So, and each one of these conversations then continues in the next week's opening inquiry, so that you ask people how they, where was their attention that week? And you use that thematic in the moment of grace and challenge. So like if you can look at week 2, you'll see that it's, I ask you to share one moment of grace about attention, or about your challenge regarding attention. That is also not required. If there's comes something that happens, which we have all learned does, go with that particular idea. These linking questions are only meant to kind of provide a cohesive focus for each particular session. And the overall arc of them is to get deeper and deeper into these somewhat more complicated ideas and abstract concepts. So you can see, like, we've given you weeks 1 through 3, and I think you can like easily see how they actually work together. We have most of these things worked out through week 8, but I really also would like, and I would love to hear from everybody for ideas for scripture passages or illustrative passages, for any of these particular ideas that we could then add into the curriculum before we actually get these groups started. Sometimes the thing that strikes me as an example is not really the best example, it's just a example. That's true even if you get to sort of your group and like right in the middle of week 3, you think, oh wait, I have a perfect thing for week 4. Feel free to use that and share that with your group. It might even be helpful to sort of ask your group if they also have things that they think about in that discussion. The main goal of all of this is to be able to talk about your faith, to be able to talk about these ideas, to be able to feel connection with the people in your group, to be able to articulate ideas, even if they are not the ideas that they've been taught to have. To be able to sort of hold those differences, to be able to understand those differences, is really important in community as we sort of think about those things together. So if you look at right at the beginning, you'll see the program outline. We'll see that what week 1 through 8, see the themes for each particular week. So right now I'd sort of just like be open to questions. Does anybody have any questions regarding this particular part of the curriculum?
Are we going to share the curriculum with the people in the group, or just the leader?
I think you can. I think, and I had talked with Brad about this at last, during the Lent groups, it was a little bit hard to share. I had a PDF, so it was hard to kind of cut and paste. But I think it would be helpful to kind of have a document and be able to share, and you can decide how much to share. Like if your group wants to have the whole thing, you know, if they can pay attention for 8 weeks, sure. If they want to have 1 a week, that's perfectly fine too. So, and it's always sort of fun to have like prepared audiences. Other questions?
Has there already been thought put into how these groups will be described in the publicity to the church? The amount of commitment or what exactly the group is going to be like? And I ask that because I've led some groups in the past where it's kind of clear that people are like, oh, this is a bigger or more of a commitment, or they only show up for a few of the sessions, or actually one person that got into it and said, this just isn't what I thought it was going to be. So I just really curious if you all thought about that yet.
Emily, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So we started publicizing them in the e-news on Thursday, and again in the weekly today. We were really trying to be careful about how we're billing them, right? It's clear from the publicity that it's an 8-week series, and that they're guided conversations. Taylor spoke to it in her sermon today from the pulpit. So she really kind of gave it some background about, you know, if you're looking for your people, this is a good place to find people. So I can pop in the chat the write-up that we've done so far, but we just have 1 week, and we've had, you know, a handful of people sign up so far, but we're very early in the game.
What did we talk about? What's the link? What is the proposed link of these link of time in these groups, each session?
I think an hour and a half. I think that's generally what we were thinking of.
Okay. Okay.
I want to go back to Davis's question. I think, you know, we just always have to kind of accept that some people might go, oh, well, I don't want to do this, or something happened. But and if we share the curriculum, then at least someone could like work independently alone if they were not so much into their group, which is not exactly the purpose, but it's something. I have designed it so people could, I mean, if you miss one session, it's not gonna change what you can gain from the next session. You won't feel like hopelessly behind. So I'm hoping that, and of course we also have no homework. So that's really important, and maybe people will feel like they can just like, okay, good, yay, no homework, and be able to come with that. So.
Are the groups going to be both virtual and in person?
Emily, I think that's you.
Yeah, so after we meet today, I'll send a follow-up survey to each of you to kind of gauge what your schedule looks like, what your preference looks like in terms of meeting in person or online. You know, when we were building this, we were in hopes that more of them would be in person than not, but we can be flexible. That's part of the registration as well, to see, you know, where people are most comfortable. And so it may depend on, you know, how we can match up our facilitators with the participants. So that's another question. You know, if you're in person, what does that look like? Are you hosting someone in your home? Is it a meeting at the church? Is it at a restaurant? I don't know that restaurant's necessarily the best place, but it could, you know, we can be flexible about where it is. So we need to hear from you what your preference is.
The one thing about the virtual nature of it is that geography plays less and less of an issue.
What's the goal for the size of each group?
I think the goal would be 8 to 12 participants. We may put more than that if we have the ability. To speak to your concern, Davis, you know, if there's somebody that shows up the first week and decides, this is not for me after all, if you have some attrition, then you still have a group left. If you start at 8 people and 3 decide, never mind, then all of a sudden you have a really small group. And we do have some facilitators today that weren't able to join us. So we're recording this conversation. I think there's about 6 more or so. So we have a really good slate of facilitators. So thank you to all of you. We're hoping that we have a number of participants to include all of you. I think the goal would be to have 2 facilitators per group so that you can work in tandem together. It may depend on how many people sign up.
Any other questions?
Are staff members going to be facilitators too?
Well, I know I intend to be a facilitator, so unless no one signs up for I just won't.
Yeah, and I think Brad and Devin may do a piece that takes from this curriculum, but might tweak it a little bit, specifically targeted at young adults. I am not going to be a facilitator. I'm kind of like the manager of it all.
Our benevolent overlord.
Usually benevolent.
As long as you don't cross me.
That's right, her mother's here.
She knows.
Any other questions? Well, I can tell you, I'm going to send you, I'm going to say like the week that I am a little bit stuck on for this is the week on presence. So if anybody comes up with some really great biblical scripture passages on presence or any kind of like literary passage or description of that particular kind of experience, I am really welcome to those suggestions. So feel free to send
Diana
those.
Butler.
Where's my book? Yeah, John, where's my book?
Yeah, Diana Butler Bass does a whole chapter on that that's really good.
Okay, great. You'll have to like email me that,
in her
John.
new book, Freeing Jesus. The men's group.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there it is. Okay.
3 of us have read it in this group, so.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent.
4 of us, excuse me.
4. Okay. All right. Well, I'll get that book this weekend and kind of like make sure I like go over it. So, or you can just send me the page
I can
numbers
do-
and I'll go, great. That's wonderful.
I'll leave them in your box.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Well, okay, let's
All
get
right. Well,
into...
Brad, I'll hand it back to you then.
Thank you, Amy. Let's get into our discussion of fostering vulnerability, which probably is a phrase that makes you feel something immediately, depending on what your experiences have been. And it's something it's generally good in a church environment, but it's also something that has been a part of a lot of abusive conversations and abusive relationships in church environments. So even if we haven't experienced those kinds of ideas and relationships, we need to be aware of them, and we need to be aware of some of the things that are holding people back from having the kinds of conversations and relationships and friendships at church that we're not just encouraging, but trying to enable. And that's one of the points that we want to really put out in front. Like, most of the folks that are going to come to these groups are fully capable of having the kind of conversation that we want them to have, but they don't feel safe having it. And so it's not teaching them how to express themselves. It's providing an environment in which they see that it's safe. They see that they're with other people that are going to respect their ideas and folks that are going to engage with them in that relationship. So again, we're not going in and teaching people how to talk. We're going in and entering to relationships with one another in which we become comfortable with sharing ideas and thoughts and feelings that you don't just walk into a room, even a church building, and immediately feel safe talking about. So with that long rambling introduction, just a few quick points, and then we'll talk about a couple of strategies, which I've labeled unhelpfully on your agenda as starting from comfort. And I really should have said they're strategies for fostering vulnerability or something like that. So we just can't expect people to live into this culture that we're trying to build, to live into these groups that we're trying to build just by asking them. I'm going to say that same thing a few more times in different ways because I want to really nail it home. That's what we're facing here. We have to build a culture where having that relationship feels safe enough. Being vulnerable never feels safe, right? We're not trying to build pure safety. We're trying to build a place that's safe enough to be vulnerable, to let some of that safety go. So I need to feel safe enough that when I share something that makes me feel not safe, I know that it's going to be received in a way that is healthy and isn't going to take something away from me and make me not want to come back. With that in mind, as facilitators, we have to be careful not to push people to share for the sake of sharing. Your judgment will be what you rely on to decide when to push somebody, when to ask somebody, when to maybe see if they'll share a little more. But you don't want to push so hard that the act of sharing and anxiety over whether they're going to have to share becomes another roadblock in the way. And yes, this is a tough line to walk, but it's only tough if you overthink it. Your gut's going to tell you what to do in the room. Just be present and hear not just the words that are coming, but what emotions are coming along with that. In short, we want to create an environment that allows for deep engagement, but doesn't require self-disclosure. So we want to have conversations that people can participate in about their spiritual lives and experiences without requiring them to tell, you know, secrets or intimate memories, right? Those kinds of things aren't off limits, but we're not demanding them. Okay, so ways to basically cultivate these kinds of environments and conversations. It really can be as simple as leading, as being the one to go first. You want to receive good, you want to receive well when people are willing to talk, but you also need to be willing to share. And sometimes you're going to have to be the one to share first to help get things going. But what that does when the person that's leading the group, when the person that's facilitating the group is willing to do that, and you've all seen this, and I know I'm saying things that most of you already know, but experimentation is inherently vulnerable. So when everyone feels like they're experimenting together, everyone's on the same page. None of us have done this curriculum before. Some of us have done some of the practices that Amy has built into this curriculum, but never in this kind of an environment or with the group that you'll be with. So just keep that in mind. This is new for everyone. Acknowledge that, name it as much as feels, you know, normal, and try to live into it. But just in general, acknowledge the awkwardness, acknowledge the weirdness, acknowledge that this is tough. And that's going to bring everybody along. They're not going to feel like they're chasing after you. They're going to recognize you're all walking next to one another. Yes, I'm telling you things that are obvious. I'm telling you these obvious things so that you know that the obvious thing is the right thing here. Do the obvious thing. Don't overdo it. We're trying to build relationships that will cultivate an environment that is comfortable. And then we're going to dig into the deep spiritual conversations. And that's why, as Dr. Wink will lead us through in a moment, when she talks us through a session, we start a little lighter where the conversations are more in between the people. And then we move deeper and deeper until at the end, by week 8, most of that conversation is about our interior experiences and where we've come over the last 8 weeks. So it's a ramp, and it starts a lot less deep than we hope it gets. But again, That depth is going to come from the participants and from y'all, the facilitators, because the curriculum never demands it. It is for the group to determine the best path through. One other quick note. This is something I always have to hear. And in fact, I have a little Post-it note on my monitor, and it still doesn't always work, but it's really important to slow down to listen. This is especially a problem when you get, for me, and for I know at least a few of us in this room, when you get really excited about something someone's saying and you just want to respond to it immediately. But wait, because there's probably more there when we're having these kinds of conversations. Pause and listen. These are going to be one of those groups where there's occasionally silence. That's okay. Being comfortable being silent with people is a sign of the environment we're trying to build. Now, my last point before I turn it back over to Amy, when you're thinking about where and when to meet, just think about the ramp. Think about what kinds of tough conversations or just personal conversations, not necessarily tough or even private, but just personal, the kinds of things you don't want to be yelling over a table in a crowded restaurant. Make sure everybody's going to be comfortable in the environment you're in. Make sure it's something that you talk about with the rest of the group. Because if you're uncomfortable with the environment, you're not going to be comfortable with the conversations we're pushing, right? It's all about building that environment where people are comfortable to talk. Okay, I've said the same thing about 10 different times. Amy, Emily, do y'all think I left anything out for fostering vulnerability or starting from comfort? Okay, just let me say it one, please, Kristen, go ahead.
Do we commit to confidentiality in these groups?
So as we sort of think about these as covenant groups, it's really important that you hold that confidentiality, and you can in the first session sort of talk about what the groups are for and what you think is appropriate, and you can ask people what their comfort level is in sharing outside the group. But generally what happens in the group stays in the group, right? Unless it is something that is of great concern. And I would emphasize that if you know someone is in trouble, then that's where you reach out to our pastoral staff and make sure that they understand what's actually happening. That indicates a level of comfort, and that's exactly what we want in our community, is that people feel like they can talk about the trouble that they are going through. And right, as Davis says, a danger to self or others, or if they are in some kind of danger, then that's really important to think about. And if you have read our safe gatherings policies, those are really important to remember as well, that in some instances you are a required reporter. And so those things are important to remember as you are thinking about. And I think it's probably safe that you could, I'm going to say, talk to Emily first about any concern you have in a particular group and get her advice on the next step to take with that. Wouldn't you agree, Emily? I mean, I think that's probably the safest thing to do. And in our Lent groups that we had some people who had some crises, and it wasn't oh my God, that person's going to kill themselves, but like, oh, that person is really struggling, and here is the place for you to actually get some help in other ways. Davis, I'm not 100% sure that everybody who is a facilitator is Safe Gathering certified.
I'm not.
I'm also not sure they're not.
I don't even know what it is, so I'm not.
So Safe Gatherings is our safety policy. It's most relevant with people who are in ministry with children, youth, and vulnerable adults. As the conference defines vulnerable adults, it's people over the age of 18 who have developmental, physical, mental disabilities. So while we are talking about cultivating vulnerability, we're all being vulnerable with each other. That doesn't meet the policy's definition of vulnerable. So these facilitators are not required to be certified. Certainly, if that is something of interest to you, I can help you pursue that option kind of tangentially, not related necessarily to the small groups, but that's what it is. So what Amy was referring to is our safety policy for our specific church. And in it, it talks about, and there's actually an appendix that's from the state of Texas. You know, we are a mandatory reporting state. And so anybody who hears of harm that is being done to someone or has to be reported, and it has to be reported by the person who hears it. It's not, oh, well, I'll tell Taylor and Taylor can call CPS, for example. No, it's supposed to be by the person who hears it.
Does
that help clarify?
Is it something?
Oh no.
What's going on?
I have to type. How Ed needs to be further away from you.
Type it in chat, Jan.
Yeah.
I think, given most of our experience in small groups, I mean, I think that probably the most likely thing that we'll be running into is someone is experiencing a death in the family, or someone is like having difficulty at work, or any of those kinds of things, which don't really qualify as who would you report that to, but that's something that as a community, we'd want to know, well, I know some resources, you might know some people who would be particularly helpful to recommend, to say, oh, I know someone who has that experience and they're really helpful to talk to. And that's the particular, level of this particular aspect of pastoral care is here is our connective goal is let's get people connected to the people they need to know who can help them through challenging moments so that they know, like, this church cares about you. Did you get your question typed, Jan?
To be clear, the mandatory reporting is really only about abuse or neglect. So any other issue that comes up, that can fall within the confidentiality. Now, if it's something that you feel is a pastoral concern, then you can take it to Taylor, maybe in consultation with that person.
My first instinct would be to ask the person, is it okay for me to ask or get in touch with Taylor or Emily or Brad or Amy?
I think
unless it is abuse or neglect.
Yes, I think that's right, Kristen.
That's just right. Yeah. Okay.
Questions?
I saw Davis noted that I skipped over making room. This issue with, having strong personalities and quiet personalities all in the same room. This is where, your job as a facilitator will probably be most key, is to just try and figure out ways to receive and welcome that strong personalities comments when they are, contributing to the group, but still trying to also welcome in those quieter folks that sometimes have to be asked, what they're thinking. And that's okay. You can ask someone, what they're thinking or what their response might be. And if they don't want to jump in, then, you can also respect that and still ask them again, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or the next session, whatever feels appropriate at the time. I find that that's, for me, noticing who's not being particularly talkative but seems to have things to say feels pretty easy. It's the person who hasn't talked very much, but their face is lighting up every other word. And in a small group like this, I think that'll be very clear. Where it's harder, or where at least for me, it's generally harder, is that strong personality, that very excited person who doesn't realize that answering every single possible thing that they can answer is stealing all the air out of the room and keeping anyone else from answering. How you respond to this really depends on the personality that you're dealing with, and whether it seems like something where even in the moment you could say, oh, yes, Emily, what a great point. But let's try and hear what some other folks are saying, because remember, we're trying to start conversations, right? You can say something like that. Or if it's something that's a little more delicate that you feel for some reason, and I don't think this is going to happen, but sometimes it's easier to just say, oh hey, you know, at the end of the session, oh hey Emily, can I touch base with you about something real quick before we leave for the day, and then you can talk to Emily or whoever the problem is, whoever the problem is, in a way that is generous to everyone, and not going to make anything weird for the next session. Does anybody have others? Go ahead, Amy. Yes.
One of the things that, and you can do this as a facilitator right at the outset, is to establish a pattern of everybody having a chance to speak. And it can be as simple as going around the Zoom, you know. And once that is really set, instead of just opening it up for, like, you know, who has something to say, but actually sort of providing everybody with a single opportunity, that really sets the standard for communication in a very comfortable way. And no one has to like fight that. I mean, there may be times where someone really needs all the help, but they may also have just gotten into a pattern of that. And so I recommend just, you know, as an outset, to really establishing not just what the structure will be of that meeting, but like how it's going to be structured, how you're going to call on people.
Yeah.
And this is where two facilitators can be really helpful, because, you know, someone can be like looking to see who is the one who's lighting up, who is the one who didn't get a chance to speak, and interject and say, you know, oh, I think Kristen has something to say, or Pete hasn't talked in a long time. And those kinds of things can be an easy way to avoid the, wow, you're taking all the air out of the room conversations. And those are just things to sort of set at the beginning, so that everybody sort of figures out, okay, this is how this is going to go, you know.
And don't hear there, like, you know, once someone talks, like Amy's told us her piece, then we don't say, okay, what do you think, John? Like, folks can respond and still have that conversation. You just want to make sure, as that winds down, you make sure everyone has the chance to have their initial response, right? Not just answering to what other folks are saying, unless that's what they want to do, but everyone is invited to also speak and have a response to the prompt.
This is the place where chat can also be really helpful. If someone doesn't really feel like speaking, the chat can be a really great place for someone to articulate a question. And I have found this true in my college classes, that those students who are very quiet will actually write a comment. And then you can respond, you can say, oh, well, so-and-so has this comment, so let's explore that particular thing. And that can be a window, you know, an opening for them to be able to respond comfortably within the group situation.
Yeah, and build confidence, especially when you bring that question to the center. Yeah.
Yeah, this crosstalk, Davis, this is where the two facilitators have to go, hang on a second.
Yeah.
Davis, were you going to say something else?
The strong personalities, that was also making me think of situations I've been in where it's not that somebody's sucking all the air out of the room, but they're at a different place, and they are sharing perhaps more profoundly, or maybe even off topic. But sometimes, really what I was thinking about, somebody's maybe sharing really far deeper than some other people in the group might be. And those people sometimes find that intimidating, somehow, of acknowledging that people can be at different places, and helping. That can be a hard one to, you know, if somebody feels intimidated by somebody being perceived as further along the track than they are, it's hard to help them get past that.
I think it's important for us to not just acknowledge that some people are going to be more comfortable sharing, that there are going to be people in these groups that are already comfortable sharing anything you ask, like even beyond, like they're just comfortable enough in whatever environment they walk into. That's not an issue. But it's important that we make the point that there are going to be groups, there's going to be someone in one of y'all's groups that never shares something vulnerable or personal. And that's okay. That's fine. We don't want to push people beyond where they are ready to grow. We just want to give them the environment to grow as much as they can. And so I haven't thought about that, Davis. I think that's a really important point, and maybe that's something that's going to need to be addressed day one. I don't think we need to make a big point out of it. In fact, that might make it scarier than it is, but to just acknowledge, like, just because someone else is in here and ready to tell us, you know, whatever traumatizing or difficult story, that doesn't mean you have to. All we ask of you is to receive that and be honorable and friendly and courteous about it. You don't have to then go and share a similar story. It's not one-upsmanship. But that's just being transparent. And if you read through those tips and tricks at the end, we're not going to probably read through them today. They're all about being transparent. In my experience, all you have to do to get somebody to really genuinely try something new is to be honest with them about why it's difficult. And yes, it feels silly, but if you try it out, it'll feel a little less silly and be a little easier next time. We're all being transparent and experimenting together. If we don't have any questions.
Oh, sorry, Brad, but the other thing that you can do to mitigate those kinds of things is just talk to the person who is at a different place and tell them that, you know, other people are kind of relying on them to carry the conversation, and it would be great if other people had a chance, just because they were becoming dependent on that person leading the conversation. Because that happens, you know, that people say, okay, well, that person will always talk, so I don't have to think about this, or I don't have to contribute. And that can be, you know, people can not notice that they're doing that if they're very interested in the topic. And that's, you know, you're not shaming them and you're not devaluing what they have to say. You're just sort of encouraging them to kind of think about the rest of the people in the room who might need to be encouraged a little bit more with their conversation. That said, you can also use that person and say to them, you know, I think this quiet person has some ideas, and it would be really helpful if you encourage that person to talk a little bit more, to use them as, you know, a co-facilitator in a way. Because most people in these kinds of situations want to be helpful. They want to be useful. And often the person who is like jumping in is uncomfortable with a level of silence just because they feel like that's, oh no, we shouldn't be quiet. We should always be talking. But to have them encourage other people is really a good use of that particular kind of person. So, all right, go ahead, Brad.
I was just going to say, if we don't have any more questions, let's turn to looking at the actual day one of the curriculum.
All right, so do you want to, okay, we can't really speed through it in like 20 minutes, but we could. So in general, I would, and Jan, I want to sort of think about like your comment about establishing the practices at the beginning. So as you sort of are gathering on that first day, you might go over a couple of things that people, you know, ask people, what makes you feel comfortable? What makes you not comfortable? And really write those down, you know, write them down in chat, share them with your group afterwards so people remember what they are.
And if you do that, not to jump in, and I'm sorry, I'm having so many technical difficulties. It's Colorado mountains, what can I say? That's another way to establish trust in the fact that the group feels like they are creating the environment and you're not contingent on someone else creating an environment for you. And so that's a great way to just kind of lay the groundwork for saying, you know, trust is most important here. So
yes, exactly, Jan. All right, so I have offered this particular opening, share one moment of grace and then one moment of challenge. So we're going to do that. I'm going to start. Jan, why don't you start? You get to call on a person at the beginning. So.
Oh, great. I'm going to start with the challenge. I'm struggling in the last 24 hours with all the crises in the world and wanting to know where my faith is and where God is and all of that. In fact, about at 4 this morning, I kind of sat up and was praying, going, okay, so where are you, God? Because I'm not seeing it. And so I feel a little bit challenged about that. And maybe the grace in the same time for me is to know that my crying that out is the sense that I had in that moment of knowing God's here, and this is the world in which that spirit has been created, and I'm just a little part of it, so I don't have to carry it.
All right, I'm gonna do my go around the Zoom. So like y'all are probably in a different order than on your screens than on mine. So try not to jump when I call on you. Davis, 1 moment of grace and 1 moment of challenge.
Again, like Jan, I like the challenge first. I have been working with a 2-year-old who has an interesting backstory. Last week, he has very little language, and it was a challenge. And it was a challenge to get him to be still and try to rest. But a moment of grace came when he was finally able to do that. Sometimes the two.
So much grace, so much grace.
Yes,
All right, John McMullen.
I guess the challenge for me is it came in a particular moment when I read the 5th of a series of just absolutely hateful tweets. And I found myself wondering, where the hell are we as a country? And interestingly enough, the moment of grace was the picture of the family who was evacuated and landed at Dulles Airport and was standing there joyful that they were safe.
Thank you. Brad, a moment of challenge and a moment of grace.
I mean, like y'all, like John just expressed, just the, obviously I'm starting with challenge. I should have said that if it wasn't obvious. The environment, the climate, and I don't just mean the, ecologically, though that is definitely a concern, but politics, pandemic, war, hearing all the difficulties of others facing down these other issues, it's tough. It's a challenge right now, to be facing so much at once. But the grace and the grace really is finding those, knowing those people, having those people in my life, where I can acknowledge that, and they'll know that I'm telling them that because I need to talk to them about it, and we can have a conversation and be there for one another. And there's honestly so much grace just being in this Zoom right now, and having Amy throw us into sharing challenge and grace, and just seeing everybody perk up and not just be open to it, but being excited about it. This is what we're trying to build, and I'm so excited to do it with y'all. It's my grace.
All right, Emily.
Well, I'm touched by all of those challenges too, but I have a personal challenge this week that I'm trying to get used to. I fractured my wrist 2 weeks ago, but only went to the doctor on Thursday. And so now I'm in a cast. And I'm struggling trying to figure out how to do things one-handed. Now it's my left hand and I'm right-handed, so I'm grateful to have my dominant hand still. But I have really struggled over the last 3 days, and just been angry with myself and frustrated that I can't do, and I don't like asking for help. I'm not very good at that. And so I tried to do too much yesterday and my wrist started hurting, and that was my body telling me stop. And so grace is related in that I'm surrounded by people who have called Or yes, it has been a year of casts at my house. This is the third, well, this is the third family member. I guess it's the fifth cast. But the grace was people reaching out to me to check in with me to see if I'm okay, and offer to help because they know I'm not going to ask.
Thank you, Emily. John Hathaway.
So my moment of grace was, I guess, last night, I think, most recently, and profoundly. Jan, I'm in Colorado as well. And so it was my turn, instead of my wife's, to put our 2.5-year-old granddaughter to bed. And so singing her the same songs I sang to my kids when they were little, and just being able then just to hug her so tightly, and just feel her, as I put her in the crib. It was just that overwhelming sense of love that, I'm graced to be able to find in different moments, but that one really hit close to home. And then the challenge, like Emily's, more on a personal level, and it's more a period of challenge of letting go, and letting God be in control, and really discern what God's will is for me in terms of retirement, and what provisional membership as a deacon might look like. So that's a continuing period of challenge.
Thank you. Kristen.
So my moment of grace was yesterday I finished the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius guidelines or guidebook, whatever. And my challenge had been I had a 9-week version, a 9-month version, a 2-month version, and I needed to expand it in between to make a 3-month version. And I did it yesterday, and I finished, and I was like, wow, this is so much fun. I'm really looking forward to it. So, so that was a real moment of grace. And then my challenge is just my concern about my daughter, who's had a big disappointment this last week. And I saw her yesterday, and it wasn't very, the environment wasn't very conducive to talking or anything. So I'm a little concerned about her.
Thank you, Kristen. Mr. Meeker. Dr. Meeker.
Dr. Wink. Well, for me, life is busy. And I suppose one of my challenges is to get away from the busy every so often. And so we do an annual trek to Lake Tahoe. I visit with my brothers and their spouses and my sister at a Presbyterian church camp, which is wonderful and very inexpensive. But it was a challenge this year because there's a big old fire that's made the national news that's now 30 miles away from Lake Tahoe. The winds were blowing all that smoke into Lake Tahoe. Our saving grace was that my brother lives not far from there, so we switched plans, and I spent 3 or 4 days on the coast with no smoke, walking on the beach, and visiting with family, and I realized that I'm very fortunate to come from pretty good people, and I enjoy being around those people, and I get recharged from being around those people, which is a grace. And then I get to come back here and seriously be around you people, and that makes me feel better when I see everything that's happening in the world, and then I see your faces, and I feel a little better about that there are good people in the world, and that there are people who are concerned and are trying to do something. So thank you all.
Thank you. And Lucius.
I've had many moments of grace, particularly this weekend, being with my children and my grandchildren, and realizing how lucky Lynn and I are to live in the same city and to be so close with them all of the time. And a moment of challenge, or moments of challenge, are dealing with the issues of the kids going back to school and vaccinations and COVID, and how it can continue to isolate us.
and hearing of stories of friends of my kids who are hospitalized now because of COVID and were unvaccinated. And I have to deal with the issues of the people who choose not to be safe and to be unvaccinated and forgive them and care for them. And I do. But I am worried about our being apart from one another and trying to live our lives on Zoom. And I do a lot of work on Zoom all the time. And I'm concerned about being in a group like this that we're trying, these groups that we're trying to start and doing it all on the screen. I don't want to do that if we don't have to do that. I think it's hard to be intimate and close and talking to a box and just being a box.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Shall I lead us in prayer? You have to nod if you want me to. God of all grace, we are grateful to be together, to see each other, even in this box that is Zoom. We are overwhelmed by the things that are happening in the world, and yet here we are together. And here we are with you, thinking through these difficult things together. Be with us as we explore these ideas, and be with us as we go out into the world together. Amen. All right, so our opening scripture passage is Philippians 4, which y'all, this was, hey, like this was perfect for what you guys said. 4-8. Rejoice in Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. All right, so what engages you with this particular passage?
I'll tell you one thing, it's a great text for a choral piece. And oh, in fact, it is. It's a wonderful, and it's a wonderful song. Yes. That's the first, absolutely the first thing I thought. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Jan, I know you know that, Emily probably as well.
Any others?
I'm always struck by that peace of God, and just what exactly that means. Is it what I hope it is, or is it something better? I don't know.
And then when you find it, just how awesome that really is, those moments of grace.
Well, and for me, when it says the Lord is near, you don't have to worry about anything. I mean, maybe I do worry about things and whatever, but there's the assurance I really don't have to.
I'm engaged by the let your gentleness be known to everyone. I feel like that's something. We all need to. Everyone right now needs to wear like close to their heart, right? When we're talking to each other and everything, and also the peace. Yes, the peace that passes understanding. There's something in there. You know, yes, the peace, but it's even something, it's something beyond even what I can put my finger on.
The failure of language to describe that, yes.
Or that it might not be what I think it is. It might pass my understanding of it.
Kristen, were you about to say something?
The second paragraph is all about positive psychology. That if you concentrate on the positive things, you're going to be happier and more, what's the psychological word? Not fulfilled, but Thriving, that's it. You'll be a thriving person.
I think of it more than just positive thinking. For me, it's, at least I hope that it is, it's put your faith in these things. Because to me, just positive thinking, I can feel good about things and look at things through rose-colored glasses. And that's my turn on what you said. Maybe I think of things negatively. I think of positive things negatively. But it's more than just looking things through rose-colored glasses. It's having a faith in all of these things that are commendable, and try not to be shaken, because Lord knows we live in times when it's easy to be shaken.
All right. If I may go again, I read that think about things as think about these things as ponder these things, so that they're things for me to consider always.
What, Brad, what's think about? How was the original language? Was it think about?
Here's where we won't have Brad in our groups.
Yeah.
I think it's about letting go, just letting go of all of that stuff, whatever the stuff is, and just being fully present. That's marvelously freeing. It's a great place to be. And my question to the scholars here is, this is such good language. Is it really Paul's? Did Paul write the Philippians? Paul did?
Yeah, Philippians might be more than one letter, but we think all of it is from Paul. And in fact, all of it is probably very closely related correspondence.
Well, he did a good job here. I'm grateful for that.
And I will answer, Pete, it is contemplate, if I'm remembering correctly. It's exactly the way we're talking about it.
Does reading that, this is an additional question, does reading that make you think about those challenges that you just talked about differently?
Well, it's a reminder to me to just bring my concerns in prayer to God.
All right, so we will move on to the next thing where we are sort of expanding our exploration of those things. And this is a passage from a much longer piece by Marge Piercy called The Art of Blessing the Day. But the discipline of blessings is to taste each moment, the bitter, the sour, the sweet, and the salty, and be glad for what does not hurt. The art is in the compressing attention to each little and big blossom of the tree of life, to let the tongue sing each fruit, its savor, its aroma, and its use. Attention is love, what we must give children, mothers, fathers, pets, our friends, the news, the woes of others. What we want to change, we curse and then pick up a tool. Bless whatever you can with eyes and hands and tongue. If you can't bless it, get ready to make it new. And so I ask again, what engaged you with this passage?
Certainly the awareness, mindfulness of each moment, and being glad for what doesn't hurt. So that would be almost an examine prayer time, to review your day and say, wow, those are pretty cool. They brought me life, and for that I am glad and thankful to God.
And I agree, but I also am pondering, and I have to sit with it, about the be glad for what doesn't hurt. Because sometimes there have been things that I've experienced that have hurt, that in the long run I have learned and grown and experienced that have been to my benefit, and without them, would have missed something. And so I guess I have to ponder the way that's approached there, because I think it certainly is to focus on the moment and the love and the joy and those things that do feel like such a blessing. But I think it's also a calling for me to say, and so those things don't feel like a blessing, what can I learn from them? Not to discount them.
I like to bless whatever you can with eyes and hands and tongue. And I think what I like most about that is the hands part. It's easy oftentimes to see something and go, oh, that's wonderful, beautiful, special, or to say that's wonderful, beautiful, special. But I think the hands part is harder. The work of blessing, beyond just the recognizing it and speaking it.
I like to taste each moment. Life can get really busy, or we can get in our routines and we go through things and routines without really thinking about what we're doing at the time. It's like getting up and drinking a cup of coffee and actually tasting the coffee, and feeling good about having a moment to have a drink of coffee. You know, when you get older and your kids are grown, Emily, it's nice when they wake up on their own and get ready on their own. Isn't it nice? You have a time to actually taste your coffee. And sometimes it's nice to be able to think about having those times. Taste the moment.
That same idea of just being present in every moment. And then those moments where it might, you might find that bitterness. I like the challenge of trying to do something about it.
So what has been the focus of your attention this week?
Well, mine at work has been on racial and ethnic disparities in juvenile justice, and trying to find ways to overcome those disparities.
Mine has been starting up again, right? After summer, starting up school, starting up work, starting up routines, organizing all of that stuff again in my life, and doing it with one less person in my house. So it is, it's different. It's repetitious, but with a change, right? It's a new year, but the same things again.
Well, since two of you were brave enough to go, I will now add the question. So how did that attention feel?
Discouraging at times, but at times also uplifting when certain policies, practice, procedures were identified that could be changed to have a direct impact.
How about you, Davis?
It feels good to have something to focus on, right? For those of you who don't know, two things. I was in quarantine for 2 weeks, so it was kind of right to be able to go back to work and start up school and not just sit around the house all day and let things be delivered to me was wonderful. But and then also a foster child that I had for almost the last year was returned to live with his family. So those are my two changes. So part of it feels good and part of it feels feels more like I don't know what I feel yet, right? I don't think there's been enough time to feel that loss.
Don, I haven't seen you in a while, but thank you for what you do.
Thanks.
Yeah, Davis, I used to always say, I don't know how foster parents can love a child enough to then see them leave. And so the work you do is unbelievable.
Well, now I know how I feel, John. I'm gonna have to mute myself.
Well, you know, that leads us, I'm skipping the question about how you direct your attention, because I think, you know, your experience, Davis, is like there was a lot of things that needed to be attended to at this particular moment. And now you're having that moment where you feel those things and it comes to you. And so, you know, right now is the moment and that you have a choice to direct that attention and to think about that, what that relationship meant and what that was about. And, you know, we really enjoyed him in Sunday school, so.
The Jewish teaching is our children are not our own. They belong to God. Our job is to teach them to leave us.
We all have many children.
Well, you know, I didn't plan this, but now here's the question, and it's you, Davis. Like, how does it feel to get this attention?
Well, I mean, awkward and good, right? I know all of these people very well, so I feel very safe feeling in front of all of you. I guess, Kristen, we haven't gotten much chance to get to know each other, but now we do.
Now we do.
So it feels very safe. And I don't, you know, and I'm not kidding, you know, what John said made the emotion happen. And I have gratitude for that. I don't know if you know, I knew in my mind I felt that way, but I hadn't yet known expressively that I felt that way. And a lot of my attention this week has been geared, or in the week leading up to that, has been geared toward doing all the things that needed to be done to get ready for that moment, right? Not leave, you know, making sure all the paper, all the things. So. Thank you, group.
Thank you, Davis.
Thank you, Davis. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being courageous enough to share that emotion when it bubbled up. And that's what allowed this conversation to happen.
And I
And to
think
be
it
willing to
illustrates,
examine
you
it.
know, it illustrates our Philippians passage quite well. You know, here you're distracted by all the things that were things that had to be done, all the things, and now you have a moment to contemplate. You have to think about those other really powerful things. So, but what a moment of grace to be able to give that child back to his family, right? To have kept him safe for so long, and give him a place to be all right. And that's really important.
And I think you've given a lot of us a moment of grace too this morning, Davis, and in the promise of, well, before I even get to that, the promise of who you are and what you bring to this community, but also the promise of what these groups can offer with facilitators like Davis.
Well, that seemed to work, right? So we'll take a moment and like sort of think back, like how did that work? I mean, did you see how the pattern of questioning was working and how not everybody had to talk, but we had enough revelation, enough comfort with everybody here to be able to share those things. And y'all are great at this, and I don't think anyone will have trouble creating the same kind of feeling that you want in your group that you're facilitating. And y'all are filled with grace, you know, to be able to offer this to other people. Davis, you have your hand up, or you're just like stretching?
No, I do. I still am, I just am throwing it out there because I think it's good for us to think about, is that person who is perhaps new to the idea of a group, maybe even new to this community, may not know anybody in the boxes or in the room that they see, and they were sitting in on this. It might be awkward for them, feeling like I'm not ready to connect with these people on the level that Davis just did, right? And so I just want us to be aware that while this is great and wonderful, it could be experienced a very different way by somebody. Thinking about, I'm not saying we're going to solve it right now, but thinking about how to address and allow that person to be where they are without quelching the moment we all just had, right?
Well, I think one of the things that's important that we could all do is, if there is something that's as powerful as what Davis was sharing, is to take a moment to actually address, like, how do we all feel about what just occurred? I'm not doing that right now because we're kind of running out of time, but like, there's a perfect opportunity to say, all right, that was really powerful, because it at least particularly in this particular session, and I think it will work for every session, that we are now, our attention is now on you, and you being attended to, and us thinking about that. And then also, like, well, wow, what if I revealed something? Like, what kind of attention would I be getting for that? And that's, you know, this question about how does feeling attended to feel? It might feel like really scary, you know. It might also feel like, oh, and by, you know, maybe the third or fourth session, someone might be able to reveal that because of the way that we have gracefully talked to each other. And so even when you are sharing, you know, the possibility that you are teaching someone how to have this conversation, how to hold space for somebody. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to stop and sort of be really open about how that can be uncomfortable, you know, and say, look, this is really challenging to, like, you know, if you're not prepared for this, what can actually occur? Which I always think is the Holy Spirit moving, right? Here is this moment which community happens, just the same as the moment of sharing the bread and the wine. It's not really in the bread, it's not really in the wine, it's really in that moment of sharing. And so as a facilitator, to sort of step back and go, let's talk about what happened there. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do in these, after these, or as a part of these guiding questions. Especially as you're beginning this. Go ahead, Jen.
And I think it really makes a difference about whether you're in the boxes on a computer screen, or whether you're in. And to Lucius's point earlier, if something like that were to unfold in a room where people are together, the way people would respond to that would probably be much different than a group of people in squares on a screen. Right. That there would be more likelihood of the emotionality of the moment surrounding that person, and almost less threatening than on the screen, where somebody might be saying, am I next? And so I think it's just, I mean, that's a strategy in a facilitation, to just kind of be mindful of what's going on in the screens if something like that comes up.
And that is a challenge of Zoom, particularly, is like, you know, if I was really focusing on Davis, I can't like also look at everybody else in the room, where your second facilitator would be able to do that. Yeah. But you're right, in a room, you can sort of feel the room, and you can know who is uncomfortable, and you can know who is positioning and all that kind of stuff. So there are different strategies for Zoom facilitation than there would be in a room together. You're exactly right. So
are we leaving it up to each group then to decide whether to meet by Zoom, and when and where and how to meet?
That's Emily.
Yeah, so I mentioned that I'll send a survey after this meeting to ask you what your preference is and what availability is. And then as I'm taking registrations for participants, I'll ask them the same. So I'll try to match everybody with their preference. And then we may have to be a little bit flexible depending on where the numbers hit, but I'll try to do my best to give everybody their preference.
So by preference,
Well,
if I prefer Wednesday nights, you'd work people to the extent you're good toward Wednesday nights, or do we leave it up? I mean, so that's how you form the groups. And I guess the question then is, once we have a group formed, what's our discretion? Can we decide how and when to meet? How does that work?
Absolutely can. I'll try my best to try to line up people with multiple variables, right? The date and time that they can meet and their preference for Zoom and in person. So
Okay.
It may be challenging, but absolutely, once a group forms, if you at your discretion choose one form or another, we will support you.
Okay.
All right, any other thoughts on what we just went through? Anything that you sort of see as something you'd actually like to ask a question about?
Amy, I think you've done a great job with the structure. And
Thank you.
It seems like it's going to flow really nicely.
That's my hope. And I really hope that the questions elicit, boy, y'all were great. Y'all were like a Corvette. Like, you know, I don't even have to teach this. It just goes. So hopefully that will happen in your groups as well. I tried to give enough flexibility for everybody to like stop for a minute and address the thing that's actually happening. You're not required to get to all of these questions. And you might skip some of them and just sort of like go immediately to like what this moment feels like. And that's what that's your genius as facilitators, is to decide, here is what's going to work for this particular group. And I trust every one of you to be able to do that. So, Brad, do you want to close us in prayer?
Sure. I guess we're ready. I also want to point out, just because this is one of the skills that people coming from fast-paced environments, it's the main one that we struggle with, the silence, like the patience that Amy had to let the room breathe. If there was a few seconds of silence, she didn't jump in. You have to let it breathe. So make sure, you know, if you think it's uncomfortable, count to 3 Mississippi before you start talking, because it's probably fine. Folks are processing. And now, let's lift up a prayer and in thanks for this time we've had together. Oh. Beloved Christ, thank you for this day, for the opportunities we have to continue to live and grow as a community, to learn from one another, to grow together, to have moments of grace that interrupt our training, even to bring us closer to you and to understanding your purposes for us. Please help us to run with these small groups in a way that builds your kingdom further into this world, that builds your purposes further into this church community and welcomes more and more folks to see and understand the bounty that you offer to our lives. And alongside all of these joys and thanksgivings that we can lift up today, we also ask that you would be in our hearts, filling us with the love and the strength and the wisdom to respond appropriately and usefully to the world as it stands now. Give us the strength to know what we can do, what we can't, the wisdom to lean on those that are walking with us, and help us remember always to find you in front of us, whether you're right in front of us or far off in the distance, Lord. All of this we ask in the name of Jesus, who is with us each and every day. Amen. Thank you all so much for spending this bit of your afternoon. We look forward to hearing how things go. And please don't forget that invitation from Amy. Share with us those ideas for scripture, for readings, for questions, for ways to improve this curriculum that's already really wonderful, y'all. Amy did this thing.
All right, Davis has a question. I don't mean to interrupt you, but Davis has a question.
What can we expect next? Who will we hear from, or what's, yeah.
So like I said, I'll send out a survey asking about your availability and your preferences. We are now accepting registrations from participants. And the goal is to start these classes, these sessions the week of September 26th. So that's still a month from now. It's going to take a while to be able to build. And so we'll keep the registration open for participants until then. So it will take me a while to build those groups. And as I said at the beginning, we have about 14 people committed to being facilitators. That would presume that we have participants to fill 7 groups. And so it's a numbers game, and there's a lot of variables playing out with it. So if you're okay with being flexible, I would appreciate that grace I'll be in contact with you and let you know how many people we're getting to register at each, maybe once a week or something. I'll touch base and I'll try to be pairing you with facilitator partners and think about, okay, it looks like we're going to need a Wednesday night group. Who could lead a Wednesday night group kind of thing. So I'll be in touch with you as much as I can be, if you're okay with it being a little bit flexible for the next month or so as we get the registrations in.
Thank you for doing it.
Yeah, thank you to all of you for saying yes. We're really excited for each of you and for the groups that we hope will form this fall, because I think it's a really important step in our faith community. So thank you.